Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. Over 16,000, at least. That's how many types of medicines, approved or experimental, there are right now, I think, in the world. And that's per one website, so that could be totally wrong. The point is, there are a large number of legal drugs on the market, either over the counter or by prescription. And yet, we clearly don't have enough. We must have more, because meds are what does the curing of what ails us, not diet or sleep. Exercise, nutrients, minerals, vitamins, sunshine, or anything else, meds. We want, we need our meds. Just put a permanent PICC line in my arm and inject right into my heart all the meds. I'll be invincible. Right? What could go wrong? Right? On today's episode, first we're going to discern between lies and delusion, and then we're going to mate like mice, and finally we're going to do some deep diving, not about meds, but it may end up requiring you to take some meds. So, get out that swear jar. You shouldn't, but you might need it. Then bone up on your Grey's Anatomy. Not the show, the book. And finally pull that Hebrew interlinear off the shelf. Pop a couple aspirin, baby or otherwise, because here we go. Mark Twain is oft quoted as saying there are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. I guess Mr. Clemens never heard of science, or more specifically, the science, trademark probably applied for, Mr. Anthony God Complex Fauci himself. Yeah, I know, I thought he was gone too. To be honest, he should be brought up on charges for a number of things, not least of which is lying to Congress about funding gain-of-function research that absolutely caused the COVID pandemic when the lab-altered Kung Flu virus escaped. I choose at this point to believe escaped rather than intentionally released. Escaped the gain-of-function lab in China. Your opinion may vary. I get that. Way back in my intro to this podcast many moons ago, and let me just again remind you, awful. The first dozen episodes somewhere in there, just terrible. But you gotta start somewhere. Anyway, way back then I promised, or at least I said, that I wasn't going to talk about COVID stuff, at least not much in this podcast, and I think I've held pretty well to that. And to be honest, this segment is really much less about COVID and vaxxing and masking and distancing and, destroying children and education, destroying people, murder, etc. Somewhat more about Fauci, but much more about the advice, or at least the spirit of the advice he recently gave in his graduation commencement speech at Columbia University that I would guess most people didn't even know he gave. This one may be a bit different from my norm. That could be good or bad, depending on your feelings on what I normally do, but let's venture on and see what happens. So I've said for, probably a couple decades now, that if you give me a gaggle of data, I don't know, maybe it's a murder of data, I can give you a half a dozen conclusions, they'll all be correct, and they'll all contradict each other. How can I do this? Well, you just have to be willing to lie. That's really the long and short of it. Data is only as good as the person that analyzes it. It's crucial that when working with data, you allow the data to direct your conclusion, not draw a conclusion and then force the data into fitting into that conclusion. The problem, as you can imagine, is when you're dealing with a less than honest broker. An individual who has an agenda is a dangerous person. Unfortunately, we all have biases and agendas. There's nobody old enough to form and relate an opinion on any subject that doesn't have a bias of some sort. For most of us, once we have an opinion on a thing, our goal is to persuade others to also have that opinion on that thing. We can say that we can agree to disagree, but that's really kind of a facade. It may be true, but if we're being honest, agree to disagree generally means agree to ignore the fact that if we talk about that subject, we may never speak again when all's said and done. Case in point, vaxxing and masking and all the rest absolutely destroyed friendships, it damaged families, and there were stories where it ended marriages. And yet, opinions abound. In most cases, opinion is a matter of preference. You like fish? I don't like fish. Tastes fishy. You like blue? My favorite color is orange. You're a camper, a hiker, a kayaker. I'm a troll who is frightened by the outside, so I hide in my basement where the outside is not allowed. The problem comes in when opinions form about something that does not lend itself by nature to an opinion. Let me explain. When looking at theology, we have the centuries-old debate, Calvinism or Arminianism. At this point in our history, sadly, I'd say that most people don't have an opinion or really even know what either of those terms mean. For those that do, most people on both sides agree to disagree on their theological worldviews. The problem is they can't both be right. Either one is right or they're both wrong, but both can't be right because they contradict each other. A more common topic is the end times theology debate, right? Eschatology. There are ideas, and I'm not going to go into these here, don't worry, of pre-mill, post-mill, and a-mill. Also, we have a pre-trib rapture, mid-trib, or post-trib rapture. The various permutations and combinations of those contradict each other. They can't all be right. So there is only one correct combination, or they're all wrong, but they just can't all be right. The standard argument, if you're unlucky enough, or lucky enough depending on your preference, is that the Bible lends itself to various interpretations, and that's fine. But it's not really fine. We can throw up the facade of agree to disagree on these, but if we're being honest, the Bible doesn't have multiple interpretations. There's literally only one correct interpretation, and one day we'll all know which one, if any of them, it is. When I say that I want to understand the Bible most correctly, the most correct way I can, that's really what I mean. That there's really only one correct way to read every single verse of the Bible. I would personally like to have as high of a percentage correct as possible. I'd argue that we should all desire that. So back to our Lord Fauci in his commencement address. What we have here is a man who for his entire career has had a complex. For most of the time, it appears at least it's been an inferiority complex. And yes, this is my unofficial diagnosis. And I say this because for most of his career, he's been trying to make a name for himself in something. If you look him up, you'll see that he's been a fan of experimenting on humans with newly developed drugs for years, starting back in the 80s, trying to shove new experimental drugs into AIDS patients faster than he was allowed. He's been a very strong proponent of vaccines for everything, which is fine, I guess, but what does the data say? Now, he'll argue his view of data, but remember, he's a shot in every arm kind of guy, and he's been that guy since well before COVID. His desire was that everyone would get an annual flu shot. In fact, from what I understand, he felt that this was his last shot, no pun intended, at real fame. The AIDS thing kind of petered out for the most part. Nobody thinks of Fauci as the AIDS drug guy. At least most people don't. He didn't cure it. He didn't come up with a vaccine against it. He just did some experiments. And when a large percentage of us, young and old, said no way to the flu vaccine, that when you look at it is nothing but a guess well prior to any flu season as to what strains may be the most prominent, which is why it never really works. Well, he wasn't happy about that either. That was his last-ditch effort at being the savior of the world. Hopes and dreams dashed again. Enter the COVID pandemic. Now, I don't need to go through Fauci's relation to the COVID virus or the vaccine. If you don't know by now, you're either an off-the-grid guy in the woods in which case, how are you hearing this? Or you simply don't care. And that's fair. I completely get it. Suffice it to say that for a man with many less years left to live than he's already lived, even fewer to realistically contribute to his chosen career, although he's retired now, he saw this as his big chance. Because of this, his bias and agenda, I believe, tainted his ability or desire to carefully and logically dissect the data and come to a data-driven conclusion. Now, 4 years later, giving this commencement address, he's given the ability to speak on whatever topic he would like to speak on, give whatever advice he'd like to give to this graduating class, and he can inject, no pun intended, his bias and agenda into his speech however he'd like. And that's exactly what he did. And because of that agenda, his advice was bad. Very bad. And not just bad, it's dangerous. And not only is he giving dangerous advice purely by accident, I discovered that his commencement speech for 2024 for the Columbia Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons was nearly identical to his commencement speech given in 2023 to the Washington University School of Medicine. I mean, it's quite obvious that he feels he's developed the perfect speech, which sounds just like him, touting his perceived COVID accomplishments, decrying those critical of him and his vaccine as conspiracy theorists, as unthinking, politically driven or motivated, science-denying Neanderthals, and advising the new graduates to think critically, to think of the patient, to investigate every angle, except that. Don't even give a consideration to anyone who may speak in objection to the accepted science handed down from on high. And when I mean it was nearly identical, I mean he literally lifted his speech from 2023, tweaked it a bit, and gave it again. Huge chunks of it are exactly the same. Now, you can't plagiarize yourself. He can give that same speech from now to the end of forever. That's his prerogative. But these students have worked hard, in theory. They're graduating with very high degrees. Fauci, although I wouldn't want to be around this weasel, is a big get for colleges still. It speaks a lot for his character and work ethic, I think, that he just recycled the same old speech. I wonder how many times he's actually given this one. In fact, I did a quick search. It's mostly the same speech he gave in 2022 in Princeton as well. I didn't dig back any farther. What a scumbag. What's even worse, though, is what he's telling these brand new, freshly out of the package graduates, the advice he's giving as they move into the real world of science and medicine. So he starts by telling them to expect the unexpected, which is fine, I guess. It's actually a stupid saying that I've grown to dislike. I mean, if you expect it, it's no longer unexpected, right? Seriously. But his illustrations are even worse. He said that they were shocked to find that infected people could transmit the virus to other people, but not have any symptoms at all. Right. If you're asymptomatic, if you have no symptoms of something, then we used to call that not being sick. His agenda has gotten in the way of the data at this point. At no time in history have we ever been told that when you're not sick, you're sick, so you better take some meds or get a vaccine or stay home or whatever. Of course, at no time in history have we tried to vaccinate our way out of a pandemic. That's actually the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do. But I digress. He also said that they were shocked to find that the virus just kept escaping our immune defenses, even from prior infections and vaccination, which has never happened before. Well, the flu illustrates that viruses mutate and can reinfect regardless of if you had the flu in the past or not. As for the vaccine, well, that's why you don't vaccinate in the midst of a pandemic. It was literally forcing the mutations, causing vaccine resistance, etc., etc. His vax did the exact opposite of what they told us it would do, and he and all of us, if we choose to listen, were being told this exact thing by experts in the field of viruses and immunity and vaccines. But again, his desire to fit data into his agenda overrode what the current and all past data clearly showed. His next so-called lesson is where the real problem comes in, however. This is where he spent a few minutes railing on the science deniers. Quote, "Beware of the insidious nature of anti-science." Now, he correctly says that data and evidence is what leads to new insights, scientific progress, medical advancements, etc. But then he says this, quote, "Unfortunately, during the COVID pandemic, significant anti-science forces, tragically sometimes aligned with political ideology, accelerated in our society and became louder and more entrenched. Over time, this phenomenon, which feeds on the denigration of scientific evidence and data, is deeply disturbing because the pathway from disparaging evidence and facts to undermining the foundation of our social order is a very slippery slope, and history has taught us that lesson multiple times. During the past 4 years, we have witnessed an alarming increase in the mischaracterization, distortion, and even vilification of solid evidence-based scientific findings and of scientists themselves. At the same time, conspiracy theories arose that became intermixed with these anti-science sentiments. The net result, understandably, was that public confusion was skewed and trust in evidence-based public health principles was eroded. This became crystal clear as we fought to overcome false rumors about the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines during the vaccine rollout. I can confirm to you today that Bill Gates and I did not put chips in the COVID vaccines, and no, COVID vaccines did not, and vaccines are not responsible for more deaths than COVID itself. And now, not only in our country, but worldwide, the disparaging of scientific evidence is threatening other critical aspects of public health that are important to us, including vitally important childhood immunizations. The recent measles outbreaks are really clear witness to that. See, and here's the problem with recycling speeches. The farther we go from when he first wrote the bulk of this speech, the more incorrect it becomes. Yes, theories of chips, nanotechnology, graphene components, 5G-enabled transmitters and receivers, etc., were all thrown around. Possible? Yes. Plausible? Yes. Probable? No. As for the number of deaths from the vax versus the virus, yes, he's correct per the data he's looking at, and anyone who's followed this pandemic and the aftermath knows that the United States is the country with either the worst data tracking or the most nefarious cover-up. The best data actually comes out of Europe and possibly Africa, but the United States, Canada, Australia, that data is being, shall we say, suppressed? When you look at the data as released, oh sure, the virus killed more and the vaccine was great. When you look at global data sets, the virus was bad. The so-called vaccine was multiple times worse than the virus. But even in the regions with better data, it's still very difficult to find solid data. At best, it could only be said that the data is questionable and inconclusive, but that would be a conspiracy theory. People aren't supposed to talk about that. As for the measles outbreak, well, one may argue that damage done to natural immunity due to the constant overdrive of our immune system, due to the constant manufacturing process of the COVID vaccine inside our own cells, may be what's causing the outbreak. The term VAIDS has now been introduced into our lexicon, vaccine-acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. We've destroyed our immune system. He goes on with the next lesson, speaking of the dangers of a divided nation. Quote, "We should not confuse diversity of opinion or political ideology with the divisiveness that we are currently experiencing in our country. What troubles me greatly is that differences of opinion or ideology have in certain circumstances been reflected by egregious distortions of reality. Sadly, elements of our society are driven by a cacophony of falsehoods, lies, and conspiracy theories that get repeated often enough that after a while they stand largely unchallenged, ominously leading to an insidious acceptance of what I call the normalization of untruths. We see this happen on a daily basis, propagated through a range of information platforms, social media, and enterprises who pass themselves off as news organizations. Now, you may wonder why I'm telling you this, because this issue is very relevant to you and me since our profession is in science and medicine, and hence our very identity is anchored in data, evidence, and critical thinking, and we, as much or more than anyone else, need to push back on these distortions of truth and reality. Now, of course, seek and listen to opinions that differ from your own, but critically analyze information, which you have learned to do so well here at Columbia, so that you can discern and challenge weak assertions that are built on untruths. So the question is, whose untruth? Who's making this call? Because over the last 3 to 4 years, theory after claim after assertion, all said to be conspiracy, all derided in the media, all mocked on the late-night garbage shows, have been proven true, one after the next, to the point that now even former CNN talking head Chris Cuomo recently admitted that the vax didn't work, or maybe more accurately, that it in fact injured him, and that he is on a regular course of ivermectin prescribed by his doctor to help fix the damage that's been done to him. And this is after calling those of us that trusted the science and the data horse paste eaters, or bleach injectors, or science deniers, and murderers for not taking the vax. And he's just the most recent. Associates of Fauci in various departments, as well as Big Pharma itself, to a small degree, have been coming out over the last few months admitting in dribs and drabs that the vaccine was not, in fact, tested to any great extent, and that a lot of assumptions were made, and that it definitely can cause rare heart conditions. We're only a few years post-pandemic, post-attempted 100% vaccination of the planet, and they've admitted rare. How long before they change their tune and have to admit, well, maybe not so rare? We're seeing more and more very young, very healthy individuals dropping dead. We're seeing birth rates affected. We're finding massive fibrous clots in arteries and veins of the deceased to the point that coroners can't inject embalming fluid because there's too much back pressure. This has never been seen before, and the list of anomalies goes on. Can we definitively attribute all of this to the vax? No, because those who should be collecting this data aren't. They literally have no interest in determining what exactly is going on because, again, in my opinion, they already know exactly what's going on. But admitting it means liability or complicity or guilt. When a step change in a system occurs, you look for what changed. The virus caused a step change in some data and some trends, but the real step change came in with the introduction of the vaccine. For a few years, West Virginia was publishing some pieces of data every day. I pulled the data and tracked it every day. One curiosity I found was that every time the vaccine or a booster was released to another age group, that age group spiked for COVID deaths. Not vax, COVID deaths. Or at least that's how it was reported. That held true for every age group every time except for kids. They thankfully stayed flat because the virus and the vax, it didn't really affect them, at least not immediately. Knowing that the vaccine, so far, doesn't ever leave the system and that it never stayed in the arm as intended, but actually moved to every organ, including reproductive organs, as well as crossing the blood-brain barrier, we don't really know what the long-term implications are, despite being told that there are no long-term side effects, again, based on nothing but models and assumptions because they didn't have long-term data. Now, I say all that to say this. Because Fauci is recycling his speech, either because he absolutely believes what he's saying, or more likely as a matter of plausible deniability, he must look as if he believes what he's saying. He's telling these students to think critically, but only if the data aligns with the narrative. They're told to look at every side, every angle, as long as they're sides and or angles that are approved by groups like the WHO or the NIH or whoever. They're being told that those who think outside the box, those who question the experts and authorities, are crazy and should be brought back into line or just simply dismissed and ignored. Would you like or prefer to go to a younger doctor, one who admittedly may not have the experience, someone older, but should be more up on all of the latest advancements and techniques and knowledge and findings, and have them check their approved list of questions and concerns handed down to them from on high prior to giving your concern the time of day? If your thought, question, or concern isn't approved, well, too bad. Don't be a conspiracy theorist. I'm the expert here. See, this is what Mr. Fauci is promoting, the dismissal of real people with real questions and real concerns. A case in point, you and me. Multiple times in my past, for myself or others, I have Google researched and accurately diagnosed medical issues that multiple doctors couldn't seem to figure out. Good doctors, might I add. Doctors I happen to like. Why? Well, because I have a personal stake in me and these other people. To the doctors, we're patients. That's not to say they don't care, but they simply don't have the bandwidth to care individually about each one of us all the time like we care about ourselves. This is why we're told that the two great commandments are to love the Lord our God with all we are and to love our neighbors as ourselves. There is simply nobody on this planet that we love more than ourselves, save for maybe a close family member, child, a parent, a spouse, someone like that. A number of years ago now, I went into the hospital with a severe intestinal blockage. Let me tell you, Dan, not a happy camper. I came out after 4 or 5 days in the hospital, after a few exploratory surgeries, being hooked up to an ICU IV machine thing because of how many bags of stuff they were trying to pump into me, with 30 days of hooking up an IV at home every night to pump in a bag of nutrition. Doesn't that sound delicious? While I slept. That entire time, all I could eat, for lack of a better term, was liquids. The diagnosis? Crohn's disease. Now, after I cleared my head, after the initial month, back to eating solid foods again, taking the prescribed Crohn's meds, I started piecing together the timeline of when I had certain symptoms that led up to my hospital stay. And after doing some research online, I determined that I had a severe allergic reaction to NSAIDs, namely ibuprofen. I told the doc, an older, very smart, very accomplished doctor, a guy I really enjoyed, I really liked him, what I had found. He said that he had never heard of that before. I asked if there was any way to determine if I actually had Crohn's or not. He said that there was a blood test. He'd be happy to have that done for me, but that it would be a miracle if it came back negative. I don't have Crohn's, and I never did. Thankfully, I only had a few months of taking the prescribed meds that I was going to have to take for life, that I didn't need at all, before I figured this out. If Fauci's advice is taken literally, which he absolutely wants it to be, I would have been dismissed as a nut. I'm not the expert. They're the expert. And me finding things on the internet isn't worth addressing. The doc, in Fauci's opinion, should be more focused on convincing me I'm wrong and he or she is right, rather than listening to what I found and giving it serious consideration. My doctor, don't get me wrong, did not want to be wrong. But he was happy for me that he was, and he had new knowledge to use for the next few years before he retired. He was legitimately happy to tell me that I never had to see him again. But if I ever needed anything, call his office, he'd be happy to see me and check me out. If Fauci actually cared about these students, he'd be more focused on giving them the best information he could, the best advice he could, rather than protect his biases, his agenda, and his legacy, whatever that is. If he was a role model, a man of science, a man to be heralded as one who should be emulated in the world of science and medicine, he would be honest. He would show humility. He could still use his old speech, but he would have to tweak it with the latest information, admitting where he got it wrong, showing his commitment to using real data, real logic, in short, real science, regardless of where the data leads, stressing the importance of striving to not make rash decisions or proclamations that should never be made, irrespective of the supposed direness of the situation. He could have pleaded with the students, very smart, highly educated individuals, every one of them, to not allow ego or pride to get in the way of their humility and their humanity, to never consider themselves to be infallible. Instead, he determined his conclusion in 2020, and the last 4 years have been spent forcing data into his conclusion so as to protect himself and, more importantly, his ego. It's a sad commentary for him as a man, and unbelievably dangerous for us, and in this case, even deadly, as a science or medical expert in an elevated position of power. When working in a field of science, and regardless of why, if you're using data to drive a conclusion or a decision, you are in fact doing science. Ego and pride must be done away with. Predetermined conclusions, desired outcomes, pride, ego, or even self-preservation, think not wanting to get into trouble, will greatly increase the potential for bad science. Let me give you a few examples. Regarding masking during COVID, did masking help? No. A dozen or more studies undertaken by various government agencies over the course of 40 years conclusively stated that masking of the population in general to control the flu virus was ineffective. The construction of a mask versus the size of a virus showed that for commercially available masks, only the N95 mask would actually do anything if it was worn properly, which none of them were. Industrial hygienists, the experts regarding masking, not medical professionals, were screaming that masks wouldn't work and that long periods of masking with any mask was actually detrimental to health. But the decision had already been made. Social distancing of 6 feet. This was taken from a paper written by a high school student during the Bush era. I believe during the swine flu outbreak, if I remember correctly. It was soundly debunked as being arbitrary and without scientific merit. In fact, various organizations and colleges found that 20 feet was needed, or that no amount of distancing would help, and on and on. But the decision was made that we had to do something, so they said to distance, and then they shoved the data into their errant conclusion. Stepping away from COVID, have you used any of the new paper straws? Or have you purchased anything with the metal straw? Do you know why they're pushing the removal of plastic straws? Well, a study was done that said we use something like 500 million plastic straws per day in the United States. Of course, this contributes to the dreaded microplastic contamination and straws in the noses of turtles. Of course, as TikToker Ryan Beard, @RyanBeardOfficial, sang,
"If turtles weren't so stupid, they wouldn't put straws in their noses. When I see a straw, I put it in my mouth. Straws don't belong there, but the turtles don't know why. So maybe they all deserve to die."
I love that song. But do you know the background of the straw study? Few people do. A 9-year-old boy called a few straw manufacturers to ask them how many straws were used per day. They all gave him various guesses, so he settled on 500 million per day, which he thought was somewhere in the middle of the guesses, and that was never verified or studied again. It was just accepted as fact. Why? Well, because the woke environmentalist leftists wanted to rid the planet of pretty much all aspects of human life, and convenience, and freedom, etc. Because at their core, they literally hate humans. The data was shoved into the desired conclusion. And the list of these type of examples is endless. We're told in the Bible that a law given to the Israelites was that, quote, "You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Leviticus 19:36. Then in the book of Proverbs, not a book of laws, book of recommendations and warnings, advice, we find 3 times. Chapter 11, verse 1. "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight." 16:11. "A just balance and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work." 20:23. "Unequal weights are an abomination to the Lord, and false scales are not good." It's almost as if God is trying to tell us something through Solomon's writings. Make no mistake, shoving data into a predetermined conclusion, regardless of what the data actually shows, is using an unjust scale. So let me wrap up this segment by saying this. I don't believe that every time we see a predetermined conclusion and a dismissal of the actual data, that it's being done nefariously. It's very difficult for humans to not jump to a conclusion. I know. It's not done through any ill intent necessarily. We just have a tendency to do so. Pride, however, is the sin that keeps some people from admitting their error and amending the conclusion. Regardless of your original intent, if we can't admit that we're wrong, we've now moved squarely into the sin of pride. This is where Fauci makes his camp. He's had many people tell him of various pieces of data, of different studies, of facts. If he was an honest, humble man, he would strive to figure out if he was correct or if this other information is correct. He absolutely refuses to do so, flippantly dismissing anything and anyone who disagrees with him. Turning back to Proverbs for a moment, chapter 8, verse 13, "The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance in the way of evil and perverted speech I hate." 11:2, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom." 16:5, "Everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished." 16:18, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." 18:12, "Before destruction, a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor." 21:4, haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked, are sin. 26:12, do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. And 29:23, one's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. It's almost as if God is trying to tell us something. And make no mistake, Fauci's headed for destruction, an eternity of torment. As a Catholic, the odds are very high that he never saved in the first place. Add to that his statement of about 5 months ago when he was asked if he still attends church, and he said, quote, "No, I don't." When followed up with the obvious question of why, he said, quote, "A number of complicated reasons. First of all, I think my personal ethics on life are, I think, enough to keep me going on the right path. The organizational church had enough negative aspects." Pride goes before destruction. So whether it's as a parent or a child or an employer or employee, pastor or a congregant, when analyzing data or studying our Bible or wherever we find ourselves, we must fight our ego, fight our pride, and let the truth be the truth and be willing to humbly admit our errors. What an opportunity Fauci missed in giving the same speech he's given for 3 years running, at least. A proud, arrogant, bitter speech given by a man who wants nothing else but to be idolized by mankind, willing to do and say anything in order to receive the accolades he believes that he deserves. I think we should just ignore his example, or at most use him as an example of what not to do. Rather, let's strive to know and understand the true truth found only in the Bible, and as we read in the book of Micah, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. All right. As the Queen said in the drug-fueled psychedelic trip of a movie or book by Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, or Through the Looking Glass, or whatever they want to call it, quote, "Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." And first of all, unless you're eating breakfast at the time, all times are, in fact, before breakfast. Number 2, even if you're eating breakfast, technically it's still before the next breakfast. Letter C, I'm not a queen, and I don't need any snickering over there. And Roman numeral IV, I'm only going to ask you to believe one impossible thing, obviously and clearly before breakfast. Now, as hard as it may be for you to even fathom, I generally read the news or these algorithmically delivered articles in my various feeds with a bit of cynicism. Just a touch, mind you, but cynicism all the same. And if it's an article I'm thinking of using in this podcast, the cynicism ratchets up a bit, as I can always tell by the headline that the article will be just awful. And then of all the news feeds and all the internet-enabled devices and all my possession, this article had to drop into mine. Now look, don't get me wrong. There is plenty we can find issue with in this article. In fact, it's nearly entirely wrong. But the core premise of the article is, at least interesting, I think, at least to me. Let's see if you think the same, or really, let's see what you think at all, or if you even stay awake through this entire segment, or is anybody here? Hello? Found on neurosciencenews.com. My algorithms are so screwed up. Headline, New Hormone Discovery Explains Monogamy. So if you're a non-promiscuous Christian, which is becoming harder and harder to find these days, your first inclination may be to go to your beliefs as to why we have monogamy. Or maybe you'd go to original design for monogamy, which is right where I went. A hormone? Pfft, come on. If you're a promiscuous pagan, your first thought may have been monogahua. And if you're currently eating breakfast, you might be saying, which, come on, don't talk with your mouth full. What's wrong with you? So let's start with a bit of direct article quoting, shall we? This is a study put out by Columbia. The university. Quote, researchers found that a hormone-producing cell in the adrenal glands may explain why old-field mice are monogamous while their close relatives are promiscuous. This hormone, 20-alpha-OHP, boosts nurturing behavior, suggesting a link to monogamy. The discovery of this cell type, dubbed zona inaudita, highlights potential parallels in human parenting behaviors. Now, the key facts to this article are as follows. Number 1, unique cells. Monogamous mice have a unique adrenal cell type producing 20-alpha-OHP. Number 2, behavioral impact. 20-alpha-OHP increases nurturing behavior in mice. Number 3, human link. Findings may provide insights into human parental behavior and treatments for postpartum depression. All right, there you have it. Adrenal hormones control mouse monogamy and thus human monogamy because anything a mouse can do directly relates to humans, apparently, like eating drywall, the innate desire for cheese, and constantly dribbling as you walk. But may we start with the obvious? Who names these things? I mean, look, if it was Dr. Smithson-Steinbergensen who found this 20-alpha-OHP, just call it the Smithson-Steinbergensen hormone. That's way better than the 20-alpha-OHP. Whatever. I'm not the super genius level mouse scientist guy, I guess, so who am I to say? All right. So as the opening summary stated, you got the Oldfield mice, Oldfield being one word, not like elderly mice who live in a field. Oldfield is apparently a species, I guess. And then you've got the hoochie deer mice with their sexy little antlers and whatnot. Probably, just kind of assuming. So apparently a number of years ago, this hormone was discovered in humans, but they had no idea what it did, which, as we've discussed in the past, points to the sheer complexity and the absolute impossibility that we are anything just evolved via random chance. There's no question we were designed very, very carefully. I mean, the intricacy in which we were created with little built-in chemical-producing factories making hormones to perform tasks that make us function, but we have no idea in what way. I mean, I'm not a biology guy, but it really is kind of amazing. Anyway, this was discovered in us, but most recently also discovered in the Oldfield mice, but not the deer mice. And this is where some real science was actually done, which is a nice break from the norm. Scientists have been observing these mice for about 100 years now, most of the time likely from the vantage point of standing on a chair, holding up their lab coats, screaming, "Ee!" One observation they've, observed, is that Oldfield mice mate for life. And this isn't out of the ordinary, necessarily, as there are a number of animal species that mate for life. But the deer mice could have as many as 4 different fathers for a single litter of mice pups. I mean, look, I'm not here to judge, but it's a bit excessive, isn't it? No doubt she's on some sort of government assistance, probably scheduled to appear on the next episode of Who My Baby Daddy on Maury. As part of their mousey studies, they've studied the adrenal glands, which are apparently in the abdomen, churning out various hormones. One science-based observation is that when adjusting for adult weight, the adrenal glands in the Oldfield mice are about 6 times heavier than those in the deer mice. When studying what these vastly different adrenal glands do, they found the Oldfield mice have a gene, and here we go, AKR1C18, just rolls off the tongue, which has a lot more activity than in the deer mice. That gene encodes an enzyme, hang with me here, that creates the 20-alpha-OHP, or the Smithson-Steinbergensen hormone, which is found in humans and other mammals. So, as scientists tend to do, they thought, well, what if we take some of this from this mouse and inject it into this other mouse? Because for some reason, scientists really seem to like dealing with rodents and also injecting things. But what they found, it's not overwhelming, but it's at least notable, is that 17% of the deer mice that were boosted with the extra 20-alpha-OHP became more nurturing, as in they actually groomed their pups and they brought them back to their nests, whereas apparently 0% of the non-boosted mice did that. And I'll be honest, deer mice kind of sound like jerks. When analyzing the adrenal glands further, they found that whereas normally they're split into 3 zones, the Oldfield, or as we'll call them, the civilized mice, have 4 zones, the 4th of which the scientists named the ABC 123X. No, they actually pulled out some Latin for this one, the zona inaudita, which means previously unheard of zone. Now you know me. I'm not one to quibble, but that actually means unheard of zone. If they wanted to say previously, they should have added antia, so antia inaudita zona, not zona inaudita. At least that's what my years upon years of intensive studies in Latin tell me, and or Google Translate, one of those two. And you know me, I'm not one to quibble, but are they actually listening to the adrenal glands, or did they see the previously unseen adrenal gland, which would have been antia invisibilis zona, which I'll be honest, that sounds a whole lot cooler. Anyway, I'm not a super genius mousy scientist, just a common schmuck. Now, in the cells of this fourth zone, previously unheard of and unseen, they found 194 genes that were far more active, including key genes that manage the function of the zone, and this is where they go off the rails a bit, but we'll come back to that. What does this mean? Well, inconclusive as of now, but, quote, the new findings could provide insights when it comes to parenting behavior and challenges in humans. For example, in mice, 20-alpha-OHP is often converted into a compound very similar to the molecule, allopregnanolone, which naturally occurs in humans and has been approved by the FDA as a drug to help treat the postpartum depression that people often experience after childbirth. So based on that, they're now studying to see what role this hormone might play in human parental behavior. And I'd say that although I was initially skeptical and slightly cynical about this article, I'd say that this actually seems like there might be some merit to study this. Now, I doubt we can go back in time, but wouldn't it be interesting to find that this hormone production has been decreasing over time in humans? Now, personally, I would want to study different ethnicities to see if there are differences and compare that to the nurturing nature of those populations. Or maybe it'd be interesting to study, for lack of a better term, mutts versus purebreds. Like, take someone like me with my ethnic background of primarily 4 different ethnicities with a smattering of another, I think 4, with nearly all of them, though, being European in origin, and see what they find. Compare that with, say, a tribe in Africa who hasn't been intermixed with any other ethnicities and see what differences they find. And maybe test each general ethnic background, like African, Asian, Caucasian, Latino, and so on, to see if there are differences in a certain people group. And then mixed ethnicities from different regions. Compare all of that data with things like birth rates, divorce rates, etc., etc. See what they come up with. I'd also be curious if external stimuli causes more or less production. Like think adrenaline, that's produced as needed based on external stimuli. Well, I'd study religious backgrounds or lack thereof. I'd study those eating a vegan diet or paleo or Mediterranean or what I like to eat, nothing but garbage and chemicals. Does that have an effect? I think you could study this from dozens of angles to see if there's any correlation at all. Now, I believe I mentioned this previously, but I used to scoff when people would try to claim that gay people are born that way. No, it's just selfish, blatant sin, right? Well, many years ago, I started looking at this differently. If someone is born with a physical handicap, say they're missing digits or limbs, or they're born blind or deaf or whatever, that biologically comes down to a glitch in the code as they were being formed. Some damaged or mutated bits of DNA that align, and it created an abnormality. Similarly, aren't mental type issues the same, whether that be, say, autism, mental retardation, or like what I'm pretty sure I have a touch of, Tourette's, right? Especially when stress kicks up. I've got breathing tics, right? Little noises and grunts that I do. Generally, mostly controlled in public, not so much at home. Wouldn't those be genetic abnormalities? And as we probably all have something, wouldn't some sort of abnormality be something we would consider? Well, I think that at least a subset of those who believe themselves to be gay may have a genetic mental abnormality. In other words, they literally may have been born with that proclivity. Now, don't hear me wrong. That doesn't make it right or okay. It's not something that must be acted upon. Men are generally more sexual in nature, but that doesn't mean we get a pass to just hop in bed with any woman, that'll have us for a night or two. The Bible makes it clear that men, and women too, but especially men, will struggle with this. I mean, Solomon had 1,000 wives and concubines? So, as straight men must battle their natural tendency towards sexual sin, so must those who have gay temptations. Back to our 20-alpha-OHP, wouldn't it be interesting to find that over the last 100 years, as more and more processed foods were incorporated into our diets, or more electronic and radio signals were blasted across the sky, that this hormone has been dropping and dropping? That although, say, abortion is most definitely the sin of murder, that more women and men, but primarily women, have a deficit of this hormone causing a more deer mouse action, promiscuity, indifference to the life of unwanted baby, or maybe there's a general deficit of this hormone that's leading to a more widespread, more acceptable practice of polygamy, or leading to more divorce, or even pedophilia. Now, this doesn't excuse sin. Hopefully I'm clear about that, but I think we could really do some incredible studies on this. Maybe there's something there, maybe not. But this would be much better money spent if we're looking for the right things, as compared to, I don't know, looking at gay ducks in Afghanistan or whatever they're spending our tax dollars on these days. And why couldn't or why wouldn't God design us with a nurturing hormone? He wouldn't have to, but he could. A hormone that triggers our brains to tend a certain way with regard to family and children. Why not? And as sin has caused everything to degrade, to tend toward chaos, just as we are physically degrading, this hormone may be naturally and or artificially degrading as well. I mean, am I wrong, or do you hear what I'm yelling? Okay, now, I'd be remiss if I didn't go back and point out some issues I've got with this article. It was a very good, observational, science-based article, for the most part. But then they turned to the party line that must be discussed in every scientific article. No, not climate change, evolution. After discussing the zona inaudita, so probably 3/4 of the way through the article, they almost made it, right? 3/4 of the way through the article, it reads this, quote, "This completely unheard of structure apparently evolved rapidly. Genetic mutations accumulate in genomes at roughly predictable rates over time. By measuring the number of mutations distinguishing these species, the scientists estimated this novel cell type evolved within the past 20,000 years, which is just an eye blink when it comes to evolution." Of course. Now, I say they made it 3/4 of the way, but that's not entirely true. That's just where the blatant evolution narrative kicked in. About 1/3 of the way into the article, they revealed the relationship between oldfield and deer mice. Quote, "Prior work suggested these species are evolutionary siblings based on similarities in their skulls and teeth and other anatomical features as well as their genetics." Definitely not as blatant, but just as ridiculous. So look, of course these mice are evolutionary siblings. I mean, yes, their skulls, teeth, and general anatomy are going to be similar, and their genetics will definitely show similarities. They're mice. They evolved from mice. Most likely they evolved from a pair of mice that were on the ark terrifying Noah's wife and 3 daughter-in-laws, daughter-in-law, whatever. You see, what we have here is microevolution, changes within a kind over time. That happens all the time. This is what Darwin saw in his now famous finches. This is why we have people groups with definite ethnic differences like skin colors or hair type or eye shape or whatever. In fact, in the article, they say that the deer mouse is found from Alaska to Central America. I guess they get around in more than one sense, if you feel what I'm laying down. And the oldfield mouse lives primarily in Florida and Georgia. Well, if you take a mouse population, split half of them over here and half of them over there, and isolate them from each other, given a number of generations, and in 4,500 years, that's a lot of mouse generations, the kind will split into unique species. Still mice, still very similar in many ways, but definite differences will appear over time, and they may lose the ability to interbreed. Doesn't make them any less mice, any less the same kind of animal. But my favorite is the evolutionary speculation. Let's break down that one paragraph, shall we? Regarding the 4th zone adrenal gland, the article reads, quote, "This completely unheard of structure." Okay, unheard of according to what? Their knowledge? I mean, they have no idea how common or uncommon this thing is. Quote, "Apparently this evolved rapidly." What, did it? I mean, evolution is truly an amazing thing. It's slow and random. It's directed. It's thinking. It's fast and predictable. It's literally everything science needs it to be for all situations. In this case, it must have been rapid because, quote, "Genetic mutations accumulate in genomes at roughly predictable rates over time." Now look, this is likely true, okay? This is actually science that can at least theoretically be measured. Mutations to the genetic code do accumulate over time in all creatures. And I won't argue that they have data that says mutations accumulate at a specific rate over time. Now, these mutations are also repaired through various internal processes and through procreation. If they weren't, not entirely sure humans would exist anymore. And I know that creatures like mice wouldn't exist. I mean, there are only so many mutations that can happen before creatures can't procreate or live anymore. And mutations do not equal evolution. Evolution, by definition, is a gain in information. We have a massive amount of data on mutations. There's literally no evidence of gains in information or mutations leading to a new species or kind of creature. That's all fairy tale fantasyland hogwash. Quote, "By measuring the number of mutations distinguishing these species, the scientists estimated this novel cell type evolved within the past 20,000 years. Okay, well, Look, a number of assumptions here. They're assuming that differences between the mice are mutations from a common ancestor. Again, mutations don't equal evolution, unless, of course, you need them to be because, science. We don't know for sure that these mice had a common ancestor. As I said, they likely did, some sort of rodent that was taken on the ark, but we don't know that. That's an assumption. If these mice did have a common ancestor, and now these two species can't interbreed, that means there's been a loss of information. That's the opposite of evolution. And disregarding all of that, they're making the assumption that the cumulative mutation rate they've calculated for animals today is the same as has been seen always. An unprovable assumption, which then calculates out to about 20,000 years, which is an unprovable number. Quote, which is just an eye blink when it comes to evolution. Oh, yeah, yes, indeed. 20,000 years is an eye blink compared to hundreds of millions or billions of years. According to my favorite interactive tree of evolutionary life, the site is onezoom.org, rodents split from primates about 75 million years ago. Then through a number of evolutionary splits, mouse-like rodents came about 57.4 million years ago, with true mice lumbering along 39.2 million years ago. Ancestors of the deer mice split from the rest of them 31.2 million years ago, and then through a number of splits, deer mice finally came along at 9.55 million years ago. Oldfield mice took a different direction at the 31.2 million years ago split, and they split, and they split, and they split, and they finally came on the scene just a mere 5.31 million years ago. So, and sure, 20,000 years is really just kind of an eye blink. But a question, Your Honor, why does this tree of life show a split between Oldfield and deer mice 31.2 million years ago, with their specific evolutionary final forms being 4 million years apart, but this article, this study, says they're only 20,000 years removed from each other? Guess just another one of those evolutionary miraculous mysteries, right? Whatever you need it to be. So why do I bring up all this evolutionary stuff? First, to mock them, because this is just patently absurd. The entire evolutionary theory is so ridiculous. The only way this could ever be taken seriously is if man has, been given a strong delusion to believe a lie. We willingly choose to believe anything that justifies our sin and our desire for there to be no God, no all-powerful being who created everything and maintains it all and owns it all. But second, to tie this back into the first half of this segment, they have some compelling, not conclusive, but compelling data that this Smithson-Steinbergensen hormone, otherwise known as the 20-alpha-OHP, has an effect on the nurturing nature of mammals, as well as potentially the tendency toward innate monogamy in animals. Now, we know that this hormone exists in humans. I gave you an off-the-top-of-my-head kind of list of stuff that I'd want to collect, data that I'd want to try to determine if there's something chemically that's going on in humans that's causing us to become more callous and cold toward children and relationships. No, I'm not discounting sin as a broad category, but yet this as another consequence of sin, which is contributing to what we see today. But they go a different direction. They go toward the potential for new drugs. And look, I get postpartum depression. I've seen it firsthand. It's not pretty, it's not fun, and it's very real. But that's the thing these scientists find interesting and possible. They don't even give a second thought to monogamy or nurture in humans because they're blind to this possibility. To the unregenerate, godless world, marriage, divorce, abortion, abused or abandoned children, sexual perversion, Who's the Father Maury episodes, polygamy, homosexuality, transgenderism, now dipping our toes into or back into bestiality and pedophilia is normal. This is who we are. It's natural. No way we should ever just question that, right? So sadly, a massive study that could actually be worth the tax dollars that would no doubt fund it, directly or indirectly, will never be done. Just the hope for a new drug. One day, we'll know how humans were originally designed and how far off our systems, even possibly our physical features, are from the original. One day, I believe we'll know what all the little ooey-gooey bits and pieces that make humans do and how they do it and what their original intent was. One day, for as complex as we currently know humans and animals are, we will be simply in awe at the God-designed complexity that man was created with, understanding the depth of the very simplistic summary statement of, quote, and God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. All right, let's do the disclaimer.
Warning. The following commentary are the thoughts, questions, and revelations, but not in a charismatic sense, of the host of the Logical Christian podcast. Although the host, as handsome and wise as he is, attempts to do his due diligence in validating these thoughts, questions, and revelations, but not in a charismatic sense, before bringing them to you, the faithful listener, it is possible, although highly implausible, that he may be in error. Please ensure you do your own research. Be Bereans, as it were. Should errors or questions arise, please contact the witty, jovial, practically saint-like host. Please help me. He's making me say this with any and all comments.
Yep, here we are. Let's be Bereans Chapter 5. You know the drill. Let's hop to it, I guess, right? All right, that's enough hopping. Let's go ahead and start now, looking at what notes I have in my journal. I put my little stars next to. All right, we left off last time in the book of Numbers. That's where we'll pick up this time. And as luck would have it, well, Providence, right? Because you believe in luck, right? So as Providence would have it, we come to Numbers 19, the red heifer. Hey, did you guys hear that there are a couple of red heifers that meet all the rabbinical requirements, and they've been shipped to Israel, and they're going to apparently be sacrificed, and the temple is going to be rebuilt, and the end times are upon us, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, this story started manifesting itself earlier this year, and let me tell you, it's got Glenn Beck all flustered, at least for a while. I'm not sure if he's worried about it now or not, or if he'll come back to it or not. I don't know. He might have moved on by now. He even had Jonathan Cahn, the Messianic Jewish rabbi who fancies himself to be a prophetic something or other, author of The Harbinger and the Mysteries of the Shemitah, to talk about what this means for end times prophecy. Now, you may have heard Glenn Beck talking about it if you listen to him, or you may have heard other sources talking about it. If you watch TBN or Daystar or CBN, there's a good chance they had Khan or someone on there talking about the red heifers. Now, I fancy myself to be somewhat of a prophet as well, and I'm getting something. It's coming and it's fuzzy. Message is on its way. What does the red heifer mean in Israel right now? Answer's here. Nothing. It means nothing. That's what it means. So what are we talking about here? So Numbers 19, verses 1 through 10, primarily talk about this red heifer. So let's read that quickly. Quote, "Then Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, This is the statute of the law which Yahweh has commanded, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel that they take to you a red heifer without blemish, in which is no defect, and on which a yoke has never been placed, and you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be brought outside the camp, and be slaughtered in his presence. Next, Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight, its hide and its flesh and its blood with its refuse shall be burned. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet material, and cast it into the midst of the burning heifer. The priest shall then wash his clothes, and bathe his body in water, and afterward come into the camp. But the priest shall be unclean until evening. The one who burns it shall also wash his clothes in water, and bathe his body in water, and shall be unclean until evening. Now a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place, and the congregation of the sons of Israel shall keep it as water to remove impurity. It is purification from sin. And the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until evening, and it shall be a perpetual statute to the sons of Israel, and to the sojourner who sojourns among them." A little bit farther into Numbers 19, we learn that if a man dies in his tent, that tent and everything inside, anyone who contacts the tent or furnishings, anyone who touches a corpse, etc., will be ceremonially unclean. So they'll take the ashes and water and a hyssop branch and sprinkle themselves and everything else, and it's a cleansing ritual. Okay? So according to gotquestions.org, this red heifer thing pops up every few years, with the heifer meeting the qualifications, either being born in Israel or delivered there from somewhere else. And apparently some priests are standing by to sacrifice the animal and burn it, and then use the ash water to cleanse the location where the third and final temple is to be built. And here we are again. The problem is that this is Mosaic law. There's no need for an animal sacrifice, no need for this ash water, and a lot of debate as to this third temple. But as Got Question says, things kind of got exaggerated. Quote, "The red heifer ritual as established in the Mosaic law was fairly simple. In the interval since that time, Judaism has added many standards and extra criteria. Talmudic tradition speaks of the type of rope the red heifer was to be bound with, the direction it was to face when being slaughtered, the words spoken by the priest, the wearing of sandals during the ritual, etc. The rabbinical rules listed many things that would disqualify a red heifer from being sacrificed. If she had been ridden or leaned on, or if she had a garment placed over her, if a bird had rested on her, and if she had 2 black or white hairs, among many other conditions not found in the biblical text." Now they go on to say, quote, "Must a red heifer be found before the rapture occurs? No. Jesus could return to receive his own at any moment. The rapture is not contingent on the presence of any particular cow. Must a red heifer be found before the temple is rebuilt? Not necessarily, although temple advocates certainly want one for ceremonial purposes. Are animal sacrifices of any type required today? No. Jesus fulfilled all the requirements of the law, and his sacrifice provides true forgiveness and life eternal." They then cite Hebrews 9:13-14, clearly explaining the fact that we no longer need to murder an unblemished red cow. Quote, "For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling those who have been defiled, sanctify for cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God?" So this red heifer thing is great for talking heads. It's good for selling books, but it's not anything we need to be concerned with, and it's not pointing to the end times. We're living in the end times right now, and have been ever since the ascension of Christ back to heaven. As to how the end, the rapture and judgment and everything else will happen, well, I'm torn on that one, to be honest, but I know I'm not looking for, nor am I concerned with red cattle. That's the old covenant. We're not living under the old covenant anymore. Now, the church I'm currently attending is a Reformed church. Think Calvinist, if you want to put a name on it. Reformed typically leans towards an amillennial worldview, which basically means the end-time prophecy and Revelation and various other locations is and has been happening since Christ ascended, and most of what you find in Revelation is symbolic. That's as opposed to likely what most of you believe, a premillennial view, which means all that end times prophecy is literal, it's for the future, and it'll be kind of like the Left Behind series. Now, I'm personally starting at Left Behind. I'm open to learning about the amillennial view, which, as of right now, Revelation is the book that we're studying on Sunday mornings. I'm open to learning what that means. And as of right now, I'm kind of in limbo between both views, where I can't fully agree with the idea that everything is symbolic, but I'm not exactly jiving with Left Behind right now either. So I'm a man without a home, and a cow, to be honest. That said, I'm still not worried about red cows. I don't think we need to sacrifice the cows and turn them into ash, because that's just not the covenant we're living in. Okay, enough of that one. Just wanted to address it since it's becoming more popular again in most Christian circles. Moving on. Let's try to knock out a few more observations here. Moving to chapter 20, a pivotal chapter in Numbers. This is the infamous Moses smacking the rock to get water incident. The incident that caused God to exclude Moses and Aaron from entering the promised land. Now, I've been trying to keep track of time throughout my reading, like a time reference for each of these events, and location to a lesser extent, I guess. As a kid, I mean, even as an adult, really, it kind of felt like the distances were much greater. You know, they're really wandering kind of a small area, and the timing of events just felt different than what it really was in actuality. Now, I just say that to say that this event, I believe, takes place in the first month of the 3rd year since the Exodus. Not that far into it, right? The Israelites were complaining about water, or the lack thereof, and once again, in true fashion, the drama was jacked up to 11 out of 10. You know, we should have just died. We were slaves back in Egypt, but we had stuff. I wish we were slaves again. I mean, seriously? I don't know. Maybe if I was back in that time, in that situation, maybe I'd say the same thing. I don't know. So Moses was told by Yahweh to speak to the rock. Well, he didn't speak to the rock. He got mad, and who could blame him? Certainly not I, and smacked it with the staff he was told to bring with him. I don't think it's any mystery that for most, if not all of us, looking at this as humans, we simply feel that this was unfair. Why would God not allow Moses and Aaron to see the promised land? This is unfair for them. Look at what they've done. Look at what they've endured. Look at the stress they're dealing with. Look at all the good things they've done. And this one little thing, that's what God is going to get all uppity about? Maybe this Old Testament God is the mean God that everyone says he is. Except for hitting the rock, I don't believe was really the major issue. Now, we don't know what Moses was supposed to say. We're not told that. But Yahweh told him to speak to the rock, and it would bring forth water. Well, Moses didn't speak to the rock. He yelled at the people. Again, I can't blame him. And he said, quote, "Listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock?" Then he smacked the rock, and Moses and Aaron brought forth water from the rock. Not Yahweh, or at least that's how it appeared. Yahweh then told both Moses and Aaron that they would not cross into the promised land, quote, "because you did not believe me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel." So they basically removed God from the equation. Their actions and their words attributed the miracle to themselves, not the miraculous and loving provision of God. Now it seems kind of like a moot point, but I always grew up thinking that it was striking the rock in anger. That's the thing that, kept Moses and Aaron out of the promised land. But that's not how I read it now. And again, these observations I'm making may very well be a "well done, Dan" kind of observation on your part, and I'm okay with that. That's fine. Now, I wonder, and there's no way for us to ever know this, but I wonder if Moses had done everything the exact same, yelled at them, hit the rock, but attributed it to God, the water to God, the miracle to God, rather than saying, "shall we," denoting he and Aaron did the miracle. I wonder if the result would have been the same, if they still would have been kept out of the promised land. Of course, as a Calvinist, this was God's ultimate plan from before creation, so again, a moot point, but an interesting thought exercise nonetheless. Okay, one more. Balak and Balaam. This is almost a tragic comedy, or maybe just a comedy. I don't know. This is the story of Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab, wanting the Israelites to be gone. So the idea was hatched to have the prophet Balaam come and pronounce a curse on them. Now, we all know that Balaam is a bad guy, but really, from reading the account in Numbers, I don't know that there's any way for us to deduce that, at least in this couple chapters of this account. Now, Balak's representation, right? His reps come to bring Balaam back with them. They came with enough money to make it worth his while. Balaam told them to wait the night. He would ask Yahweh. God told him not to curse the Israelites. They're a blessed people. So Balaam sent these people away. Balak tried again with more money and a better prize package. Balaam told them no, but said to wait. He'd see what, quote, "Yahweh my God" has to say. Interesting that he's saying his God. He at least identifies as a follower of or a prophet of Yahweh. Now this time God says to go, but only say what he is given to say. But then verse 22 tells us that God was angry at Balaam for going. And I'm legitimately unclear as to why. Balaam, from the information we've been giving, is doing what God is telling him. He waited, he asked God, God told him to go. He's going. Now, the only thing that I can figure just right offhand is that God already told him not to go, but after they came back with more money and stuff, Balaam asked God again. And as we know of the story with the angel of God standing in the way of the donkey talking, the revelation that if the donkey kept going, the angel of God would have killed Balaam. I mean, God was not happy with Balaam at all after giving him this permission. So as I do, I looked it up. The consensus through various trustworthy faith leaders seems to be that the answer to why God was mad is found in verse 20, where God answered Balaam saying, quote, "If the men have come to call you, rise up and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you shall you do." Then in verse 21, we read, quote, "So Balaam arose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the leaders of Moab." Okay, they say, these leaders, they say that the key is the first word of God's statement, if. But that's if you're reading the KJV or the NKJV, because in the KJV, that verse reads, quote, "If the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them." Well, we're assuming that when those men stayed the night, they were in Balaam's guest bedroom, so they were right there waiting for his answer while Balaam was making waffles for breakfast that morning. But that likely wasn't the case. So we don't see where the men came back to Balaam and asked him again the next morning to come with them. We just see that Balaam saddles his donkey and goes. And that would make some sense since Balaam saddled up and left with two of his men, but none of Balak's entourage was with him when this whole talking donkey, angel of the Lord business took place. Here's the problem, though. From Bible Hub, that verse 21, is written basically 3 different ways, which gives 3 slightly different meanings, and only the KJV version would make sense of this. So the 3 ways that it's written is, first, quote, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go with them. This would mean that the men would have to come back in the morning to ask Balaam to go with them again. Next is some form of, quote, since these men have come to summon you, go with them. This says that the men came back a second time, so go. Lastly, it's some form of, quote, if the men have come to call you, rise up and go with them. This would mean that the men came back a second time, and if their stated intent was for you to go back with them, then go with them. And this is where the Hebrew gets a little skizzy. The Hebrew word im, I-M, is the word that's being translated as if, or as the word since, and it can be translated either way, so you have to look at the context of the verse as a whole to figure out which way it should go. Some verses that use that word are easy to tell. It can only be one or the other. There's no way to mistranslate the usage. This verse in question, it could be used either way, but that relies on the word vo, which is B-O, no laughing, which is being translated as both come and have come. So the word since could be used with both come and have come, but the sentence structure is pretty clunky if you don't use the have in that phrase. So I think the since only really makes sense if you say since they have come. Okay? Translating im as if can be used with both come or have come. So I'd be most inclined to say that if is the more likely correct translation of that first word. So then we have to look at come or have come from the word vo. So I went to Google Translate, understanding that biblical Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, is not quite the same as modern day Hebrew, but I put in the word come and I put in the phrase have come. The lettering for come is very close to and pronounced very close to the same as vo, the modern pronunciation navo. The lettering and pronunciation for have come is very different and is pronounced kigia. This makes me lean heavily toward the translation to come rather than have come. Now, the other thing that makes me believe the KJV has it right with simply come is that the sentence is kind of nonsensical if you use have come. Why would God say, quote, if the men have come to call you? We already know the men came to call him. That was the point of them coming. There was no if about that. So I believe that the KJV and the NKJV, as well as, and I looked on Bible Hub here, ISV, that's the International Standard Version, and the WBT, which is the Webster's Bible Translation, I think they got it right. And I think all the other translations have it wrong. And this is the only translation with the information we've been given that makes sense as to why God would have been mad at Balaam for saddling up and heading out in the morning after it appears that God gave him permission to do so. Now, if you don't know this entire story, you need to read it. It's chapters 22 to 24. It really is kind of comical. You can almost see Balak in all his royal garb, all his men around him, expecting curses on this infestation of Israelites, and then turning red, huffing and puffing, and Balaam says what God tells him, pronouncing blessings, not curses on them. Balak was probably just beside himself. So to wrap this up, why was Balaam considered such a bad guy? Well, besides this whole if debacle, if we only look at Numbers, at least the 3 chapters, 22 through 24, it's kind of unclear. Now, in chapter 31, we read that Balaam is killed as part of a battle or a raid by the Israelites, and specifically killed. It wasn't like he was just a casualty of war. They specifically killed him. Well, in chapter 31, And also in Revelation chapter 2, we find out that Balaam was actually instrumental in the Israelites acting unfaithfully to Yahweh, allowing or encouraging them to eat food sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality with foreign women, causing a plague amongst the Israelites. We also find out in 2 Peter that Balaam was apparently a lover of money, which is why he probably didn't wait to be asked by Balak's men in the morning. He just saddled up and went, wanting his reward for going. And finally, we read in Joshua that Balaam wasn't just a prophet. He was in fact a diviner, and that carried with it the penalty of death, as that was specifically forbidden by God. Okay, so a long way to go there. But this is what Bereans do, right? We want to understand the Bible as rightly as possible, and sometimes that means we need to dig deep into things that seemingly don't make sense. And we shouldn't be satisfied with just glossing over passages or stories that don't make sense. Now, I know we probably do that way more than we don't do that, myself included. I'm looking at me here. But when there's something that we don't understand, especially in the internet age, there's no reason we can't dig and read and learn what the confusing passage means or what this specific word means. I truly believe that if more people did this, really dug into what the text says rather than just taking the words of the guy up front every Sunday, if even that, a lot of those up front Sunday guys would be sent packing for lack of interest. There's a lot of wolves that won't touch difficult texts. They won't take the time to study and try to exegete the scriptures rightly. Or there's a lot of them who simply just don't care. They already know what they want to tell you, and in order to call it church, in order to call themselves a pastor, they'll throw a couple Bible verses at it, not really caring what those verses truly mean. If we could filter out a lot of the wolves, that would allow a lot of people to get into some good solid churches where that guy talking up front actually cares about the sheep that are sitting in the pews and actually does the work and the study where we can work with him and learn this. Anyway, with that, I guess we'll wrap this up. So think about what I told you. Bereanize me, for lack of a better term. Put some thought into what you're reading. Don't be too OCD that it makes you skip past something that's unclear so you can keep your Bible and a year plan intact. You can catch up later, or you can go beyond a year. It's okay. It's more important to understand what you're reading than it is just to get through, at least in my opinion. Quality over quantity, clarity over speed, that sort of thing. As always, let me know what you think, give me feedback, ask questions, yell at me for my ignorance, but be Christ-like in your demeanor when you call me an ignorant baboon. Now, get up, get off your duff, go be a Berean. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.